The scorching desert wind whips across the sand, a relentless, gritty blizzard under the unforgiving Egyptian sun. It's July 1942. The British Eighth Army is in full retreat. A shattered and demoralized force fleeing before the seemingly unstoppable Afrika Korps. Their commander, Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, is a ghost, a tactical phantom who has outmaneuvered and outfought them at every turn. Tobruk has fallen. The road to Alexandria and the Suez Canal, the very lifeline of the British Empire, lies open. Panic grips Cairo. In London, Winston Churchill faces a crisis that could lose him the war. The entire Allied position in the Middle East is about to collapse. In this moment of absolute desperation, one man stands between Rommel and total victory. A man whose name is now largely lost to history, overshadowed by the very person who would replace him. This is the story of how General Claude Auchinleck, the forgotten commander, saved the Allies from total defeat. By the summer of 1942, Auchinleck was in an impossible position. He had taken command of the Middle East theater less than a year earlier, inheriting a complex and overstretched command. His predecessor, General WWII, had been sacked by Churchill for failing to deliver quick victories. Now, Auchinleck was feeling that same pressure from London. His own winter offensive, Operation Crusader, had been a bloody, costly success that pushed Rommel back, but the Desert Fox had struck back with astonishing speed. The disastrous Battle of Gazala had just cost the Eighth Army dearly, culminating in the shocking surrender of the fortress of Tobruk, with over 30,000 men taken prisoner. The British were reeling, their confidence shattered. Churchill was apoplectic. Rommel was now less than 100 miles from Alexandria. For the men on the ground, the situation felt hopeless. One soldier wrote, "We were all very tired. We had been pushed back 400 miles, and a lot of our best gear had been lost." Confidence in our leadership was low. It was in this atmosphere of despair that Auchinleck made a decision that was both drastic and brilliant. On June 25th, he flew from Cairo to the front lines and did something almost unheard of for a commander-in-chief. He sacked the current commander of the Eighth Army, General Ritchie, and took personal command himself. He was no longer a distant general in a quiet headquarters. He was now the frontline commander, sharing the dust, the heat, and the danger with his men. This act alone sent a ripple of change through the demoralized army. They saw the top man was not abandoning them, he was joining them. Auchinleck, known as the Auk, was a quiet, reserved man, born in India, who spoke several local languages and understood the landscape of colonial warfare better than almost anyone. He lacked the flamboyant charisma of a Montgomery or a Patton, but he possessed a steely determination and a deep, analytical understanding of warfare. He knew Rommel's playbook was all about speed, envelopment, and psychological shock. He also knew Rommel's greatest weakness, his overstretched supply lines. The Auk decided he would not play Rommel's game. He would fight on his own terms. He found the perfect place to make his stand, a narrow bottleneck of land, just 40 miles wide, squeezed between the Mediterranean Sea to the north and the impassable Qattara Depression, a vast salt marsh to the south. This was El Alamein. There would be no retreat from here. There was nowhere to retreat to. Auchinleck's plan was a masterpiece of defensive strategy. He knew his troops were exhausted and not yet ready for a major counterattack. So, instead of a single massive blow, he devised a strategy of biting and holding. He would use his artillery, which was finally becoming superior in numbers, to pound German and Italian positions. Then, he would launch a series of sharp, limited attacks with different units at different points along the line. These attacks were not meant to achieve a grand breakthrough. Their purpose was to grind down Rommel's forces, disrupt his plans, and, crucially, to destroy his infantry, particularly the Lesmobile Italian divisions that were holding his line together. By targeting the Italians, Auchinleck forced Rommel to use his precious panzer divisions as firefighters. Rushing them from one crisis to another, burning fuel and wearing down men and machines. The First Battle of El Alamein began on July 1st. Rommel, sensing weakness, launched his own attack, aiming to smash through to Alexandria. But he ran straight into Auchinleck's new, deep, and flexible defensive system. The Germans were stopped cold. Then, the Auk began his counterpunches. For the next 3 weeks, the battle became a brutal attritional slugfest in the searing heat. Auchinleck directed attacks at Ruisat Ridge, at Teloasa, and Miteria Ridge. Some attacks succeeded, others were costly failures. The fighting was confused, desperate, and relentless. The Auk was everywhere, visiting units, talking to officers, making tactical adjustments on the fly. He was a calming, steady presence in the heart of the storm. He knew that this was a battle of wills, a contest of who would break first. He was betting that it would be Rommel. Inside the German command, frustration was mounting. Rommel, exhausted and sick, was being worn down. His panzers were being bled white, not in glorious tank battles, but in costly, piecemeal actions against stubborn Allied infantry and artillery. His Italian allies were crumbling under the relentless pressure, just as Auchinleck had planned. By the end of July, the Afrika Korps was fought to a standstill. Rommel's last desperate push failed. His advance was over. He had been stopped. The Eighth Army had held. For the first time in his spectacular career, the Desert Fox had been strategically defeated. He wrote in his diary, "Our strength has failed. We had to call off our offensive as the British resistance was too strong, but the victory came at a great cost." The Eighth Army was also exhausted, and Auchinleck's final attempts to break the Axis line failed. The front solidified into a stalemate. In London, Churchill, ever impatient for a decisive headline-grabbing victory, saw only the stalemate. He didn't fully grasp the miracle Auchinleck had performed. He had not just stopped Rommel. He had saved Egypt, secured the Suez, and prevented the entire collapse of the Allied position in the Middle East. If Rommel had broken through, he could have linked up with German forces advancing through the Caucasus. The strategic implications were terrifying. But all Churchill wanted was a general who could deliver a swift, crushing blow. In early August, he flew to Cairo and, in one of history's great injustices, he sacked Auchinleck. He was replaced by General Harold Alexander as Commander-in-Chief and, more famously, by Lieutenant General Bernard Montgomery as commander of the Eighth Army. Montgomery was a master of self-promotion. He arrived with fresh troops, brand-new American Sherman tanks, and an overwhelming superiority in air power and artillery, all things Auchinleck had desperately needed but never received in sufficient numbers. Montgomery took Auchinleck's plan for the final offensive, refined it, gave it a new codename Operation Lightfoot and, with his immense material advantage, executed it 3 months later at what became known as the Second Battle of El Alamein. It was this battle that went down in history. Montgomery took all the credit, basking in the glory of a victory that Auchinleck had made possible. The Auk, meanwhile, was sent back to India, his career in the main theater of war effectively over. He accepted his fate with quiet dignity, never speaking ill of those who had wronged him. So why is this story so important? Because it reminds us that history is not always written by the victors, but by the most famous victors. Auchinleck performed one of the greatest feats of generalship of the entire war. He took a beaten, retreating army and, through sheer force of will and tactical genius, halted one of the most brilliant commanders in history. He created the conditions for the final victory at El Alamein, the battle Churchill called the end of the beginning. Without the First Battle of El Alamein, there would have been no second. Without Auchinleck, there would have been no victory for Montgomery. He was the stonemason who laid the unshakable foundation upon which another man built a cathedral and claimed it as his own. The Auk's legacy is a quiet one, a testament to duty, resilience, and quiet competence in the face of overwhelming odds. He was the right man, at the right place, at the exact right time. He didn't seek the glory, but he secured the victory that mattered most, the one that saved everything. What do you think? Is Auchinleck one of history's most unfairly overlooked generals? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing for more forgotten tales from history.